Welcome back to the secret classroom here on the FreeMelon Society. I'm Eli Martyr. Today we are going to be continuing our series on the hijacking of the vegan movement, a subject whose importance is beyond my ability to convey to you in words. Veganism. How on earth do we make sense of a statement like veganism being hijacked? Well, when we're dealing with a proposition like the hijacking of the vegan movement, to the average person, it might be an incredulous thing to accept that there might be some sort of insidious influence that is coloring or tainting the purity of what the core elements of the vegan movement or the vegan ideology espouse. So if we want to get at the heart of the matter, then we have to systematically go through a progression of ideas and a progression of understandings so that we can come to the right conclusion at the end. And so part one of this series did exactly that. How could you have the power? How could you have the funding? How could you have the coordination to do this on some sort of global scale? In part one of this series, we addressed the stumbling block of the means to be able to do such a thing as hijack the vegan movement, right? On a global scale. So we went through a history of authority. What has authority on this planet done in the past? Let's go with the facts. What have they done? So, if we had trouble accepting that there could be this insidious influence guiding events today, well, we've taken care of that part of what makes this incredulous to the average person in part one of this. That there is a force out there that has the means, has the will, they have the funding, and they have the otherworldly level of coordination. So if you have not seen part one of this series, then make sure to go back and watch part one so that you're caught up. In this part of the series on the hijacking of veganism, we'll still have further trouble accepting that veganism could be hijacked by something unless we understand what it is that is doing the hijacking. And so if we're going to understand what is doing the hijacking to the vegan movement, we have to understand the social and psychological engineering weapon of environmentalism. What is environmentalism? What is the environmental movement? How did it start? Where is it coming from? What's its essence? What is it? We need to understand that before we can understand how its capturing of the vegan movement makes sense. So that's what we're going to be doing in this part of this series. We're going to be fleshing out and exploring this whole idea, this concept of environmentalism and the mind job that it is doing on people today, and particularly those in the vegan movement. This series is a labor of love. I'm as vegan as they come, but what pains me the most is seeing my fellow vegans fall victim and fall prey to the insidious and cunning machinations of social engineers who use and manipulate our yearning to do good in the world and direct it into something that is not of our deepest intentions. And if what we want out of a true approach to veganism, a true approach to environmentalism, okay? If what we want out of these things is to take humanity to the best place possible, then we must align ourselves with truth. And truth is currently not what is being promulgated in the mainstream conventional culture out there. What is in fact happening is duplicity, deceit, and deception. I don't like it. And today what I'm hoping to do is to pull and tear the metaphorical leeches off the vegan movement and reveal evil and pernicious influence for what it is. Thank you so much for attending the secret classroom today. Let's jump into this lesson and we'll get to it. Okay, so we left off part one after giving you a whole slew of examples of what authority has done in the past. Okay, now what we can learn from that in summary is that there is a certain guiding direction that is powering all of these types of incidences throughout history. This is all being done for a particular purpose. Now, that purpose has been encapsulated in different manifestos from different organizations and institutes throughout history. The out-of-control obsession by globalist totalitarian powers, it's led to a consensus among them as to the general blueprint for complete global domination. You can see here down in the slides that I've enumerated some of the works throughout history. The Communist Manifesto, okay? The Protocols of Zion, the Technocracy Handbook from the early 20th century. I should mention quickly, the Protocols of Zion, you're gonna hear, I mean, if you Google this, you're going to just hear nonstop, oh, these protocols have been debunked, they are spurious, they're not real, they're just made up, blah, blah, blah. You'll hear all that. But if you just read it, okay, but if you actually just read it, what you're going to find is you're going to find an enshrining of the very same principles that echo throughout all of these different manifestos. You start to be able to come up with a common denominator that unites all different things. And so you can see through the BS and the bogus of conventional debunking journalists and authors and whatnot. And anyway, so the Humanist Manifesto, the Crisis of Democracy, this is a Trilateral Commission publication. The First Global Revolution by the Club of Rome. This is actually something we'll get to later on in this series. Or in this lecture, excuse me. Okay, so let's talk about Agenda 21. All the work on exposing Agenda 21, this and Agenda 2030, this has been done for me many, many times by many, many brilliant researchers in the past. I don't need to contribute my own flavor to this, really. It's already been done by the light workers out there. So, this is Rosa Koire. And if you have not read Behind the Green Mask, UN Agenda 21, we'll call this unacceptable. You need to read this book, plain and simple. So this is from Rosa Koire, and we'll just kind of encapsulate what Agenda 21 is. Agenda 21 is the action plan to inventory and control all land, all water, all minerals, all plants, all animals, all construction, all means of production, all energy, all education, law enforcement, and judicial systems, all information, all food, and all human beings on the planet. Okay? Sounds crazy, but if that sounds like too much to believe, tough. What do you want me to say? Learn truth, get on board with truth, or not. It's up to you. It is an inventory and control plan. It's about data sharing. It's about money transferring from the developed nations to the lesser developed nations. And ultimately, it's about destroying your ability to have a voice, destroying your ability to have representative government. It's about changing your government to governance, entirely destroying your ability to be free and to be independent. Rosa Koire says that this plan has existed openly on paper since the 1880s with the Fabian Society, attracting luminaries like H.G. Wells, George Bernard Shaw, Bertrand Russell, but it tends to hide behind environmentalist causes and more recently behind the C-19 and systemic racism. It wasn't until now that the technology existed to make their dreams come true. Now, Agenda 21, of course, was the plan for the 21st century, And as the years went on, Agenda 21 got updated to UN Agenda 2030. And if you go onto the UN's website, the UN Agenda 2030 website, you'll find the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 21. What we're going to do now is we're just going to translate, okay? Because you have to understand, what evil says and what it intends are two different things. Evil says a thing to you, but how you translate that statement and how evil translates the statement are completely different things. They are the masters of euphemism. They're the masters of veiled and clothed, disguised language. And essentially what these sustainable development goals are is that it is the clothed and veiled euphemistic language of evil telling you something that you might want to hear, but has a completely different meaning when it's fleshed out in reality to them. So, let's take goal number 1. End poverty in all its forms everywhere. Okay? Let's translate what that means in actual real terms. What that means is, see, notice how the language is vague throughout these UN documents with no detailed explanations on how these goals are to be achieved, right? They never do that. They never tell you how. They'll throw you something vague in hopes that you imagine what they mean. So, end poverty in all its forms everywhere, period. Well, who the hell pays for such a massive task? I'll tell you who pays for it. You rob the entire middle class to pay for that endeavor. That's who pays for it. Not government. You, the middle class. So what we're talking about is the same old evil of communism and socialism disguised as Agenda 2030. It's distribute the wealth. It's socialism. So we're going to put everyone on welfare programs, handouts, and achieve complete reliance on government, universal basic income, blah, 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 the socialist wet dream. That's what they mean when they say end poverty in all its forms. It's not this airy-fairy, head in the clouds, oh yeah, end poverty, I'm totally for ending poverty. No, you have to be able to decode what these people are just blurting out to the public to placate them, right? Don't worry, everyone. We're going to end poverty in all its forms. And that's all we're going to say about it, all right? So if you have any questions, shush. We don't want to hear it. Agenda 2030 goal number 2. End hunger. Achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. What does that mean when it's translated into actual human terms? What it means is GMO ubiquity. Monsanto owns everything. Fake synthetic food worldwide. When they say achieve food security, what they mean is achieve food security for their profits, for their chosen massive corporations and NGOs and whatnot. That's what they mean. Security for them that keeps and maintains their power over the rest of the world. Food security means that government only can grow food, not ignorant, unsafe human beings. No. Humans with contaminated, unsterilized, homegrown crops. No. See, that to them is insecurity. So if we're going to end hunger, we're going to end hunger by forcing everybody onto synthetic foods, GMO crops. Oh, eat bugs. Oh, of course, eat bugs. That is the vegan future, right? You can get all of the protein that you are missing or the protein that you need by eating bugs. They want you on your knees eating bugs that scurry around on the ground, eating the decomposers of the planet and make you think that you're doing something good. Goal number 5, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Now this one's odd because on the face of it, it's like, what does that have to do with environmentalism, which is all about ending pollution and ecological welfare and whatnot? What does this empower women and all girls? Let's translate what that means. Translation: destroy any and all concepts of natural God-given biological truth. That's what it means. It means destroy womanhood by obsessing it with masculine traits and destroying masculinity to ensure that there is no hard resistance to government tyranny. I'd also like you to notice something. Notice how equality in the physical world is an observable and verifiable impossibility. It means that there is no such thing as equality anywhere you go in the entire physical universe. Where you start to get into true equality is when we start to talk about essences and when we start to transcend out of the world of physicality and duality into the conceptual, into the emotional realm, into the thought realm, and the higher vibrational realities that make up the universe, that make up the entirety of reality. But the portion of reality that is made up of the physical world, equality is not possible. There is no such thing. Anything that seems completely 100% equal to another thing is not equal. It might be similar, but equality is impossible. And this concept of equality being something that characterizes life on higher planes of existence and equality being impossible on the lower planes, they're going to play on this to confuse the heck out of you guys. When they say empower all women, basically what that means is erase their natural feminine tendencies. That's what that means. Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, is really nothing short of the next evolution, which may be a hidden evolution of the Communist Manifesto. Quote from the Communist Manifesto, Chapter 2. "The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital."
So just quickly, something I need to add here that I missed in explaining while I was actually recording this, because each of these things could deserve a lecture on their own, but I'm just kind of touching on them, and I forgot to explain this with a couple more details that are probably important. So firstly, what I should say is I know that it's very likely to happen that there's going to be people out there that are listening to what I'm saying here, and they're going to fabricate out of what I'm saying some sort of meaning that is not being said whatsoever. So guaranteed there's going to be that person with unsophisticated thought that says, "Oh, so you're saying you agree with sexist treatment of people? Oh, so you're saying you don't believe people should be treated with equal respect and dignity and all those silly things, okay? Just stop. I mean, give me a break. The natural rights and freedoms afforded to one person are common to all people, all right? There is equality in that regard, and anytime that there have been injustices in the past that dealt a blow to these common natural rights held by all human beings, then the right thing to do is to remedy those injustices, okay? So everyone's on the same page there. Now, I just read a quote from the Communist Manifesto, and I realized what I had missed in describing earlier was how that quote has any relevance to this issue of gender and whatnot. The quote says the bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes. There's context there that's missing. The complement that is vanishing, it's talking about private property, and it's saying when the concept of private property goes, then the family will go with it, and all of it will go when capital vanishes. So it's talking about private property and how once that concept is abandoned, then the family will go along with it, and both those things will disappear if capitalism or capital disappears. Okay, so that's what the quote is referring to. So what people might be wondering is, how does that quote relate to this concept in UN Agenda 2030 of achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls? And why they're related is because both of them seek to wage war on the family. So that's the link there that I didn't really flesh out. So I would apologize. The point is that destroying the family allows them to accomplish all the other goals that we talked about. It makes reducing the population more likely, right? Less stable families means more reliance on government, right? So by attacking the family, you have to understand that attacking the family and destroying the family makes top-down governmental control that much easier, okay? So whether it's the Communist Manifesto that's talking about literally attacking private property and getting rid of the family that way, or it's the ideological warfare of Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, where they're talking about gender equality and whatnot. It's striving to do the same thing. It's an attack on the family by creating gender confusion, gender tension, and all the other stuff that you see going on right now. So that's why that quote was added there. It's because they're both striving to do the same thing, but I didn't actually describe that very well, so I didn't want people to be confused. So sorry, I had to add this little note here.
So this is just the same evil, just put in different words. That's it. So the main idea here to recognize is that the UN, the World Economic Forum, all the globalist, corporate, oligarchical powers at the helm today are all about unfettered, unrestricted, total, limitless, absolute control over life itself. Okay? There is not one civil rights movement, economic movement, cultural change, war, conflict, or any major event that is repeated in the mass media that is not governed by the guiding principles of globalism and complete control over your mind and body. So over here on this slide, you can take a look through this if you want. I'm not going to read through all these, but these are all some of the summarized main points that you're going to find echoed through all of the different types of globalist literature. There's a commonality amongst them, and you can see that in this little encapsulation of what many of these goals are. So remember, it really doesn't matter what movement we're talking about, if it's reached any sort of mass public level, mass public awareness level, you can be absolutely assured and guaranteed that the insidious hand has had a role to play in its infusion in your mind. All of these movements are directed and engineered by globalist powers, and if you don't know that, you are being played for a fool. All of it. The feminism, the sexual revolution, the migrant floodings, the racial tension. Believe it or not, racial tension is something that had to be created and fabricated. It was, it's a crazy story. Gun violence. Now we're even seeing natural disasters and weather modification being a reality that we have to deal with. Unbelievably. All these are manipulated movements. If we had to go into each and every one of these, then we would have to dedicate an entire lecture to that. So, maybe that's something for another day. Environmental tyranny. What is the environmental movement? Well, the environmental movement is and was a well thought out, thoroughly orchestrated infiltration of an otherwise necessary growing concern for the health and well-being of the planet. The environmental movement seeks to use the environment as another useful enemy to focus humanity's attention towards in order to create fear and panic, which have always been the most sought after emotional states to manipulate the behavior and thinking of the masses. So in part one, remember how we talked about how the network of evil wanted to perpetuate the state of war, or the psychological consequences of a state of war. They wanted that to be the perpetual and chronic state of affairs. So they need to come up with an enemy. There always needs to be an enemy. Always. They cannot have a prosperous state of being without some enemy to galvanize you into a state of fear. So environmentalism now starts to turn into the perfect enemy to be waged war against. The environmental movement has conflated the reality of egregious human pollution with the lie of perfectly natural processes and elements like CO2 and normal fluctuations in climate being caused by quote-unquote evil humans, and that these natural processes must be feared and acted upon by tyrannical government edicts. Interestingly enough, now that I read this slide, this is probably one of the most important slides of this lecture, because this is just an encapsulation of what it is at its heart, right? Without all the details yet squared away. So if you're ever in doubt about what environmentalism is and why the world is going in this direction, refer back to this slide. Okay. Let's talk about the origins of environmentalism now, okay? So the origins of this green lie. In 1796, Thomas Malthus, who was a political economist, wrote an essay on the principle of population. And here is what the essay's core idea was. The world is overpopulated, over-industrialized, exploitative, and we are consuming resources unsustainably such that population will overwhelm our ability to provide for human needs. So on the side here, you can see this chart. And so this was the Malthusian prediction, is that as population grows, our ability to produce food would not be able to keep up with the exponentially exploding population. And at some point, when those two lines on the curve meet, you would have the Malthusian catastrophe, and you wouldn't be able to supply food for your growing population. That was the theory. That was the assumption. Now remember, we're coming out of the Middle Ages here, so we're getting into the Enlightenment, and we're getting into the wave of human understanding where we're starting to become much more left-brained, much more materialistic, much more scientific. And we're starting to leave behind a lot of the instinctual and intuitive foundation for our knowledge that we had in the past. And so the Malthusian ideology started to really inspire a lot of the 19th century philosophers and thinkers as a way to scientifically manage human beings, okay? And to scientifically start to manage motivation and psychology and biology, right? because we were starting to try and scientifically make sense of the world. So it started to be of interest to these world shapers and world engineers, inspired by this Malthusian threat of oblivion. To mitigate against the threat of oblivion, we should scientifically control humanity. So that's why this Malthusian idea started to pick up steam. So if we talk about now Francis Galton, born in 1822, died in 1911. The term eugenics was coined in 1883 by British explorer and natural scientist Francis Galton, who, influenced by Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection, advocated a system that would allow the more suitable races or strains of blood a better chance of prevailing speedily over the less suitable. Social Darwinism, the popular theory in the late 19th century, that life for humans in society was ruled by survival of the fittest, helped advance eugenics into serious scientific study in the early 1900s. Oh, by the way, all the sources, all the resources that I've used to put this to put this presentation together, those will all be in the description below, so you can check those out at your leisure. I've also tried to put some of the sources here in the actual slides themselves, so you can see. This is from the Encyclopedia Britannica. Plato's Republic, 378 BCE, depicts a society where efforts are undertaken to improve human beings through selective breeding. Later, Italian philosopher and poet Tommaso Campanella, in City of the Sun, 1623, described a utopian community in which only the socially elite are allowed to procreate. Galton, in Hereditary Genius, in 1869, he proposed that a system of arranged marriages between men of distinction and women of wealth would eventually produce a gifted race. And so the interesting thing here is that eugenics, right, the core idea of eugenics, when you boil it down to its real essence, you're talking about a drive to bring about and produce the best in humanity, the best qualities of humanity into the subsequent generations, right? What could be a more naturally noble undertaking, right? When you think about it. So the essential core underpinnings of the concept of eugenics is not based in evil, but like all things that are evil, they capitalize on a truth, a natural element of either virtue or value or truth or goodness or morality. And they simply encrust over that and attach onto that a whole set of creedal conceptions and misdirections that they can use to justify what they want. Francis Galton says, the question was then forced upon me, could not the race of men be similarly improved? Could not the undesirables be got rid of and the desirables multiplied? You could very easily see how that essential drive for a eugenic approach to life, if just a little bit of the wrong idea gets infused into that, you could see how this would be a recipe for disaster. Okay, Karl Marx. In 1848, imbued with the Enlightenment ideals, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels penned the Communist Manifesto, an idealist imagining of the oppressed workers of the world uniting in bloody revolution to overthrow their oppressors, namely the oligarchs and the capitalists of the world. And the Enlightenment, right, if you're unfamiliar, the Enlightenment was simply an emancipation project. It was intended to create a new civilization grounded in the autonomy of human reason and the centrality of men. The Enlightenment then was a movement that took steps toward enshrining and glorifying humanity and human thinking over God and nature. Okay? Again, you can see the underpinnings of something that can have disastrous consequences. Marx's political thinking moved powerfully into the idealistic European intellectual strata of writers and artists, subsequently spreading its toxic message into the universities. Many of the educated elite in Europe, Great Britain, and the United States became enthralled with the socialist communist promises of Lenin and Stalin of a new paradise of Earth, or paradise on Earth. If you want to read more, there's an amazing article by the Epoch Times called The Infiltration of Marxism into Higher Education. You can read more there. Okay, so as you can see, we're moving from the Enlightenment up till the 20th century, and we're seeing this creeping idea of the prominence of human thinking, of the human mind, over the glory and the grandeur of God's intelligence, of nature's intelligence, okay? So it is that movement that you have to keep in mind as we're building an understanding to what this environmental movement is, okay? So we've got this idea of eugenics now, all right? We've got this idea that humanity, if you just let it run its course, is going to just overpopulate and just kill itself, okay? So eugenics and Malthusian ideology, these now start to be able to work together. Then Marxism starts to be able to work together with this. Within the 19th century now, we move on to 1884, where we get the creation of the Fabian Society. What is the Fabian Society? The Fabian Society was established by the elite families in England to serve as a behind-the-scenes executive group charged with the duty of ushering in a one-world collectivist, socialist, globalist state through a pernicious, slow, and almost undetectable gradualism. So right there now, you can see the Fabian Society in its founding is taking on the Marxist ideology and almost by default a Malthusian ideology, because if you want to create a one world government, a one world socialist government, then you would need to reduce the population because that many people is just too hard to govern, right? So keep these ideas in mind as we move forward. Some notable people from the Fabian Society: George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, Karl Marx, Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, okay? So all these notable figures in English literature were deeply, deeply influential, right? I'm sure some of these names you're familiar with in inspiring and in creating human culture. So is it surprising to learn then that these people came out of the Fabian Society? So you're seeing now, these concepts are being infused into the literature that these individuals are promulgating, right? Why was the literature of H.G. Wells so widespread and so influential? Why was the literature of George Orwell so widespread, so influential? Why was Karl Marx so influential? Why? Because these movements had the support of the globalist powers that are seeking to govern the direction that the world moves into, right? This is what has gotten that support, and these are the people that are influential, okay? The Fabian Society was one of the very first institutions that would spearhead the eugenics movement, okay? So eugenics was already a concept, but it was missing a ruling body. So the eugenics movement, a modernized ambition of improving the human population through a statistical, mathematical understanding of genetics and heredity, exploited to encourage good breeding. The Labour Party was a direct successor of the Fabian Society as well. That's important to know. And last little blurb here, the Fabian Society was established to secretly infuse the slow poison of socialism into British institutions and eventuate the destruction of capitalism. The Fabians, however, made one key distinction between their approach to the anti-God, socialist, communist takeover of the world and the approach that Karl Marx theorized, okay? And this is important. The Fabians disagreed that violence and the tumult of class warfare were necessary to overthrow society. The Fabians determined that insidious infiltration of already established societies via stealth and gradualism, these sneaky bastards, and ideological subversion, cultural reprogramming, and war from within would be far more effective. So this is the frog boiling in water principle, where gradualism is much more effective in getting the result that you want, because the process is felt less stridently, right? All right, less directly. Okay, so we're still talking about the origin of environmentalism here, right? But I'm just helping you build in a very clear way the essence of environmentalism. Where is it really coming from? Because you need to understand this stuff if you are trying to make sense of the world around you, right? That's what we're doing here on this channel. This is why you're here in the secret classroom, because we're trying to really uncover the essence, the true essence of everything, right? Health, diet, and the world around you. You have to make sense of both of these elements if you're going to be really and truly a good person here on planet Earth, right? And to be of the utmost value to yourself and to the world around you, you need to be a good person, and that comes from understanding truth, harmonizing with truth, making that your philosophy, making that your religion, and inspiring others to do the same. So in making sense of the world, what we're trying to do here is we're just trying to simplify a lot of data in just a very sequential, logical way so you get it, right? So if we're looking at this slide now, if we're trying to understand the environmental movement, I try to put it in this kind of like math formula where you get the Malthusian and the Darwinist type of infusion into the culture. Add that to a little bit of eugenics, okay? Add some Satanism to the mix. This kind of influence of evil, this anti-Christian kind of adversarial element in the mix, the tyrannical, the authoritative, the element that rebels against the authority of the higher, okay? Add that element to this mix, and finally add some kind of Marxist communism, and the synthesis of all of these ideas, when they're merged together, what you're going to get is something like a social Darwinism. You're going to get institutions like the Fabian Society that are trying to harmonize all of these different types of principles into an executive body that is putting out the synthesis of all these things into the world, into the culture. You get the depopulation thing. You get the secular humanism. Okay, what does that mean, secular humanism? It means secular meaning devoid of anything godly. So God is out of the picture. A dismissal of any concept of universal truths. Okay. No, this is out of the picture. It's all human thought and human reason that is glorified. Okay. So that's secular humanism. You get the Club of Rome, which we'll talk about in a second here. So I hope that makes sense as we keep moving forward here. So now we get into the Club of Rome. Now we're talking about the 20th century, okay? So after all of this ideological building in the 19th century, in the 20th century, we get to the Club of Rome being established in 1968 in Bellagio, Italy, at a private Rockefeller estate.
The origins of the environmental movement as we see it began back in 1968, when the Club of Rome was formed. The Club of Rome has been described as a crisis think tank, which specialises in crisis creation. The main purpose of this think tank was to formulate a crisis that would unite the world and condition us to the idea of global solutions to local problems. In 1992, former President of the United States, George Bush Sr. said, "Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. A major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals, and an unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources. This shift will demand that a concern for the environmental consequences of every human action will be integrated into individual and collective decision-making at every level." Cutting through the code, I want everyone to consider what the words profound reorientation of all human society and unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources actually means. For everyone here tonight not familiar with Agenda 21, I would suggest that this is the beginning of your learning curve, not the end.
The Club of Rome now is the key foundational institution responsible for giving birth to the modern environmental movement. So here I've got the Club of Rome's mission statement, and the Club of Rome's mission is to fabricate a widely perceived, globally recognized crisis to serve as a pretext to galvanize the world to fight against the crisis by unifying and accepting a one-world government. This is from the National Review magazine of 1997. What the Club of Rome is, in describing the Club of Rome, is a small cadre of obscure international bureaucrats are hard at work devising a system of global governance, that is slowly gaining control over ordinary American lives. Maurice Strong, a 68-year-old Canadian, is the indispensable man at the center of this creeping UN power grab. Over on the bottom here, you can see all of these different Club of Rome publications. The First Global Revolution, The Limits to Growth, Limits to Privatization, Reshaping the International Order, Beyond the Limits to Growth. All of these books, all of this literature was to, again, infuse into the culture this idea of secular humanists, socialists, eugenic, depopulation, all these things that we talked about. These books were trying to familiarize the public with these concepts so that when these concepts are forced on us, we would accept them. So let's take the First Global Revolution, for example. This is probably one of the most famous quotes from the First Global Revolution. In searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat which must be confronted by everyone together. But in designing these dangers as the enemy, designing these dangers as the enemy, we fall into the trap which we have already warned readers about, namely mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention in natural processes, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. Okay? So, I feel like saying, screw you. First Global Revolution. Humanity is not the enemy. You are the enemy. You and your out-of-control psychopaths that want to control the world. The famous 20th century journalist, artist, and social critic known as the Sage of Baltimore and the American Nietzsche, H.L. Mencken, he wrote in Minority Report, the urge to save humanity is almost always only a false face for the urge to rule it. Power is what all messiahs really seek, not the chance to serve. This is true even of the pious brethren who carry the gospel to foreign parts. Okay, now, so far what we've got is we've got an understanding now of the spirit of the environmental movement. And if that quote by the Club of Rome doesn't sum it up, right? This is basically evil just telling you exactly how they operate. So we're understanding the essence now of where they're coming from when they try to sell you on their position on saving the planet from humans and advocating this fight, all right, for the survival of the human race, okay, for the glory of planet Earth, all right, to save the environment by marshaling and regimenting humans, okay. When they sell you that in the public, now you understand where that's coming from, okay? And it's coming from an anti-God, anti-human, and a socialist communist approach as a political ideology. And so these elements are making up the spirit of environmentalism. If you were to peel off the outer layer of all the flashing green lights and the platitudes that they sell you and what they're giving the school children in elementary school and Earth Day and all this kind of stuff, right? You know, when you peel back that layer, what you're getting is brainwashing in this direction. And this is the direction that serves the overall goal to create what is the purpose of Agenda 21-2030, as Rosa Quarry described for us. Just absolute monstrous control over the whole goddamn thing. All right? So that's the first element there of environmentalism. So next week, the video that comes immediately after this one will be the second part of the environmental issue. So we'll call this part 2A, because I don't want these to run too long. And then in part B, we'll actually get into the CO2 issue and how to make sense of climate change and environmentalism, and we'll be destroying that myth in part B of this, okay? So thank you so much for your kind attention, and stay tuned, and on the next video, we'll pick up right where we left off today, okay? I love you very much. Take care, guys. Enjoy. Mwah. I'm Eli Martyr, and we are going to pick up right where we left off from the last episode in this series, flesh out the rest of the story when it comes to environmentalism.